still, create a space for God just to dwell and just to pray and to seek his face and wait patiently on his timing.
Oh, I'm gonna wait on you. Help me to wait on you. Help me to wait on you. I'm gonna wait until I hear from you. I'll wait for you to see me through. Abide in your word and know it's true. Stand still till you tell me to move. I'm gonna wait until I hear from you. Help me to wait for you to see me through. Abide in your word and know it's true. Stand still and wait until I hear from you. Lord, help me to wait on you patiently. And Lord, help me to seek your face while I'm waiting. You said in your word, be anxious for nothing. So I'll continue serving you. Yes, I'll continue praising you while I wait until I hear from you. I'll wait for you to see me through. Abide in your word and know it's true. Stand still till you tell me to move. Lord, I'll wait until I hear from you. I need you, Lord, for you to see me through. Oh, hide in your word and know it's true. Oh, Lord, I need you. Oh, Lord. Oh, help me to wait on you patiently. And Lord, oh, Lord, help me to seek your face while I'm waiting. You said in your word, be anxious for nothing. So I'll continue serving you. Yes, I'll continue praising you. Oh, while I wait until I hear from you. I need you, Lord, for you to see me through. Oh, hide in your word and know it's true. Oh, Lord, I need you. Oh, I'll wait until I hear from you. Somebody may need to wait for God to tell you what to do. Oh, hide in your word and know it's true. Oh, until I hear a word from you. Lord, I know I need you, so I won't move. I'm not gonna move, no. Oh, Lord, help me to rest in you. I'm gonna be still, I'm gonna be still, Lord, and wait until I hear from you. Somebody may need to wait for God to tell you what to do. Oh, He's calling us to seek his face. Just take some time in this season. Take some time to be still. Take some time to be still and wait on the Lord. When you don't know what else to do, just wait. When you don't know what else to do, wait. Oh, his thoughts are higher, his ways are higher, his plans are better. Just wait on him, wait on him. Encourage yourself. Wait on him, wait on him. Say that. Oh, just wait on him, wait on him. Seek his face while you wait. Just wait on him, wait on him. Just wait on him, wait on him. He hears you, wait on him. He sees you, wait on him. Don't move, just wait. Don't move, just wait. Seek the Father's face while you wait. Seek his way while you wait. He knows right where you are. He heard your every cry. Oh, yes, he did. Just wait on them. Just wait on him, wait on him. Oh, be encouraged while you wait. Oh, seek his face while you wait. Say, Lord, I love you. Lord, I trust you. All my hope is in you. Oh, when you don't know what else to do, be still and don't move. God bless you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nia Allen.
Hello, Ebenezer Baptist.
Thank you, Nia Allen, for this beautiful reminder to wait on God. I am Jennifer Petty, and I am happy to welcome each of you to this week's Navigating Our World. We are a fellowship and ministry providing opportunities for individual growth, social transformation, knowledge, and skills to navigate our world. Tonight, we will conclude our Black Scholar series with the session Introduction to the Theology and Spirituality of Howard Thurman, presented by the Reverend Kenneth. At this time, we will have Deacon Dan Russell lead us into prayer.
Good evening, everyone. If you have prayer requests, if you could put those in the chat, we will pray for you. I want to read a scripture verse here as a basis for my prayer, and it comes out of the book of Exodus. Exodus chapter 23, verse 25, King James Version says, "If ye shall serve the Lord your God, and he shall bless thy bread and thy water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of thee." Let us go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we come to you in the name of Jesus, thanking you for another good day. We pray that our tomorrows will be better than today. We pray for everybody and everything. We pray that you will bless our bread and our water and take sickness from among us in the name of Jesus. For you are our God, whom we serve, whom we love. We give our life to you. Thank you, Lord, for blessing, for the blessings you have bestowed on each and every one of us. You have provided us with more than what we could even ever imagine. You have surrounded us with a church full of people who always look out for one another. You have given us family and friends who bless us every day with kind words and good deeds. So we thank you. You are a way maker and a promise keeper, so we bring all our petitions before you this day, because you are able to supply our every need. We pray that you will answer every prayer request that is in the hearts of those that are here tonight. Oh God, when fear comes on us as we go on this journey of life, we look to you. We know that you will remove our fear and give us faith and confidence that we need to trust you and to do your good works. We thank you that your angels are watching over us even now, for you're always with us. You protect us always. That is why we are always praising you. Our success at which so many stand amazed is because you are our mighty protector. So we thank you all day long. We praise and worship you, O God, for all that you have done for us in the name of Jesus. When we get weak from time to time as we go on this journey of life, we ask that you would give us your strength. When others hate on us, show us how to love on them as you love us. When trouble come our way, give us faith to get through it all in the name of Jesus. We pray that you would bless the now service tonight. Bless those that would lead us in conversation about and with you. Move on the hearts of Georgia's citizens to come out and vote in this runoff election and for the right candidate. Amen. Hear our prayer, O God. Give ear to our supplications in your righteousness and your faithfulness. Answer us speedily, O Lord, for we come not as a stranger, but as your humble servant. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
We now look forward to a theological reflection and presentation by Dr. Kenneth Johnson.
Amen. God bless everyone. It's so good and so wonderful to be with you on this evening. This truly is the day that the Lord has made, and hope that everyone has come to rejoice and to be glad in it. I appreciate you all coming out tonight in this virtual setting. It makes it so much better when you get off work. You can just hop on a Zoom meeting and still be at church. And so thank God for modern technology and for optimizing our time together. And I'm going to respect our time. Thank you for Reverend Vaughn being with us, and Sister Catherine Stanley, who are both working so diligently to make sure the Zoom meetings and the Now meetings are efficient and run well, and for the entire team that works around organizing this. We can't do it without everyone's involvement. Tonight, we're going to start off looking at the theology of Howard Thurman. And many of you all may have heard of Howard Thurman, many of you all have not. But what I want to do is to kind of do what I call a genealogy of Howard Thurman's theological journey. How did he become who he is? I'm going to talk a little bit about his background, his influences on his development, as well as the significant influences that Howard Thurman has had on so many of those who worked in the civil rights movement on down to today. He's quoted, he's studied, he's a true American theologian. And he's been identified for many theologian, as well as look at what is it that he gives us, right? What are our takeaways? Like, what do we get from Howard Thurman that we can use in our everyday lives, as well as our lives as we struggle or in the process for social justice? I first met or was introduced to Howard Thurman when I was a seminary student at ITC, the greatest seminary in the world. By the way, no offense to those who attend Theological Seminary, but God bless you. I was at ITC with one of my mentor, Dr. Riggins Earl, and we were reading a piece by a South African, a white South African woman by the name of Olive Schreiner. That piece just mesmerized me. It was called A Track to the Water's Edge. And I got the book and opened the preference to the book and the forward to the book. And there was Howard Thurman writing the forward and the preference to this book. And he talks about how Schreiner's work influenced him. And Schreiner is a writer who writes in allegories and metaphors and stories and dreams. And immediately, as I started reading Thurman, I saw the connection, and it really touched something in my own spirit to read a Christian writer who was able to go beyond the limitations of the Christian dialectical way of talking. Right? How do we describe our faith? Howard Thurman reached, he transcended the Christian jargon, and he brought in other metaphors, and he made me look at things, everyday things, spiritual things in a different way. And so we thought it would be interesting for us tonight to kind of look at, again, how he formulated his theology. Are you all able to see what I'm sharing on the screen? If so, would you give me a thumbs up? All right, great. So here's an important piece if you like to take notes, right? He's the grandson of a former slave, and he's born in 1899, and so his life spans from 1899 into to the late 80s, right, or to the early 80s, I should say. He was classmates with, as we know, Daddy King, contemporaries with Ralph Bunche and Benjamin E. Mays at Howard University. He preached a philosophy of common ground, which is what we want to talk about. It taught that people need to seek an inner spiritual happiness that would lead them to share their ministry or share their experience in community with others. And so the ideal of inner spiritual happiness is central to his work. He co-founded a church back in 1944 in San Francisco, California, which was an interfaith and integrated church, first integrated church, racially integrated in the country, which was revolutionary back in that time, to have people from all races, even people from other religions coming to worship at the church for fellowship for all people in California. He was the dean of Marsh Chapel, which he was the first Black at predominantly white American institution at Boston University. And then importantly, he became a mentor to our own beloved Dr. Martin Luther King. And he bridged the gap between King and Gandhi, helping King in very real and specific ways that we can actually scaffold and trace and see the connection between King's philosophy and his words and in his writings, and the words and writings of Howard Thurman. He was, in his day, really under-recognized, apart from those who were really engaged in this work of sort of the mystical aspect of Christianity, as well as those who were in the early civil rights movement led by Dr. King and those great stalwarts who led the movement, relied on Thurman as their spiritual mentor, and their giving them spiritual guidance and giving them a framework for thinking about how to fight for social justice through the civil rights movement. And so his work, from 1899 to 1981, spanned so many generations, and so many things are happening during those significant days. He touched a lot of lives during his life. One of the things that we'll see in Howard Thurman and his influence on King is this sort of sense of time, right? This idea of the spirit of the time. And if I have, I think I saw Sandra Black, she's one of my good readers. Sister Black, if you're on, would you read the section under Thurman where it starts off the movement of the Spirit of God?
Certainly. Good evening, Reverend Ken and everyone. Okay. The movement of the Spirit of God in the hearts of men often calls them to act against the spirit of their times, or causes them to anticipate a spirit which is yet in the making. In a moment of dedication, they are given wisdom and courage to dare a deed that challenges and to kindle a hope that inspires. Howard Thurman. Unfortunately, I can't read what it's taken from. The text, the font is a little too small for me to read.
That's Footprints of a Dream.
Oh.
Thank you. And let me see who else I have who can read Dr. King's quote, which I'm tying together with this. Let's see who I have. And so Sister Aycock I'm familiar with her reading. Would you read for me the quote from Dr. King?
Where it says consciously or unconsciously? Okay, is it where it says consciously or unconsciously?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Consciously or unconsciously, he has been caught up by the Zingist and with his Zeitgeist, and with his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers in Asia, South America, and the Caribbean. The United States Negro is moving with a sense of great urgency toward the promised land of racial justice.
Yes. And so what I want you to start to sort of set this framework of how I want to look at this. I'm going to stop sharing for a sec so I can get your faces. And if you guys don't mind, I haven't seen you in a long time. If you don't mind, you can put your cameras on if you want fellowship with your cameras on. I appreciate that so I can see your beautiful faces. But what I do want to talk about is this whole sense of the spirit of the times and how it's influenced by the Spirit of God. The concept of the Zeitgeist, right, is a German word that speaks to a spirit that of the age, right, the era that we live in, the spirit of the times, what that means to people to be able to tap into, to recognize, to name, to define it, right, to describe like the time that we live in. I grew up at a certain time in New York City when hip hop was just coming out. And it was a kind of, it was disco, we call them discos, Reverend Vaughn, at the Renaissance Ballroom in the Savoy, and we reopened all of those places, right? And
of course, I'd like to tell you it wasn't. Of course, I'd like to tell you I wasn't old enough to remember that, but unfortunately,
yeah, no, I did. I'm kind of just let you before before you came along. But it was a kind of it was like a renaissance, right? It was like a renaissance of Black culture and music, original music form being birthed right there in the Bronx. You know, we describe that sort of like, you know, this renaissance of music. And then those of you who are older, you know, you remember the Harlem Renaissance, right? You remember what it was like to listen to the poetry of Langston Hughes, and you know the feel, you know, and how, you know, the jazz music filled the air, right, during the Renaissance, right? Right here in Georgia, you know, Auburn Avenue was at one point this sort of bustling place of Black business and entrepreneurship. There was a time, you know, it defined sort of what Black existence looked like, what, you know, the young people talk about now, Black excellence, right? Well, it's not a new term, right? That, you know, we had errors and times, right? And so in order to be able to understand sort of this connection between Thurman and King, you really have to be able to tap into the idea of what is the era, right? What's the time that we live in? And going back to what Thurman is saying, he's saying in a sense that the Spirit of God in the hearts of men, and I would add women, moves them to act against. Look at that, right? Act against the spirit of their times, and causes them to participate, or causes them to anticipate this a spirit which is yet in the making, right? So here's the Spirit of God, right? In Thurman, and here is, as King describes, the spirit, the zeitgeist, right, which is the spirit of time. That, you know, in another place, King said, hey, it's resting upon me I can't do anything else. I have to do, what I'm called to do in this moment. Alan Bosak, who was one of the church leaders during the dismantling of apartheid in South Africa, got together with other pastors, including Desmond Tutu, and drafted a document which they called the Kairos document, right, which defined the moment. So as we talk about this, I want to tap in with you all to kind of make sure that as we talk about Thurman, you have to have a sense of time, right? You have to be able to reach in and to read the era in which we live. And that has everything to do with the Spirit of God speaking inwardly to you, but also, as we'll describe later in Thurman's duality, the Spirit of God allows us to read the times that we live in. So talk to me, class, how would you describe in a word or two, not a dissertation, but what's the time that we're in right now?
Divisive, corruption.
Divisive.
I would say a time of polarities, so it's either extreme ideologically right or left. It's like the louder you are, the more extreme you are, the more attention you get and the more pressure it kind of puts on, on the middle.
Turbulence and unsettledness.
I think of this as a time of light versus dark, light versus darkness. We see it all around us.
Light and dark.
I think it's a time of cleansing.
Interesting. Cleansing. Okay. Say a little bit more.
Always.
More.
Whenever you start to transition to something new, something has to be shaken away. Something has to be brought to the surface so that it can be exposed. And it's a time of cleansing so that we can move on to the next level.
Okay. That's interesting. That's a departure from the sort of the binary descriptions that I've been hearing. So these are all good, right? These are all good. Look at, so Thurman, as we're saying, becomes the mentor for Dr. King in a very real way, right? If you go back and look at this description of how they see the times, let me share that once again. So Thurman is saying that the Spirit of God in the hearts of men and women often calls them to act against the spirit of their times, or causes them to anticipate a spirit which is yet in the making. So here, going back to Kelly Moore, right, saying, this sort of cleansing, something else is coming, right? Dr. King is saying that the Negro has been caught up by the zeitgeist, and with his Black brothers in Africa and his brown and yellow brothers in Asia and South America and the Caribbean, the United States Negro is moving with a sense of great urgency towards, here again, something else, right? But they're coming at this really in a kind of dialogical way, right? That the zeitgeist for King is the time that we're living in, and it's making us move, right? Thurman is saying that, hey, when the Spirit of God is in us, it's making us move in contradiction. Isn't King, or let me ask you all, is King in agreement here with me?
Yes. I was thinking about, it was funny, I was thinking about the letter from a Birmingham jail, and that phrase, why we can't wait, what became the book, Why We Can't Wait, because I think that there is a part of the times that is saying, slow down, take it, don't go so fast, don't upset these people, don't make it worse for us, and so I think that, so I think what he was at least articulating, and I think it was a movement that, certainly that he stepped into, that he was able to crystallize and articulate in terms of like, well, we can't wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is that, right? There is like, we can't wait. Wait is time, right? Wait is wasting time. Wait is not reacting to the time that we're in, right? So yeah, that whole piece, and he goes on, right, in that piece talking about, well, literally why we can't wait. So I definitely agree. And before I comment on it, anyone else, do you see a synergy or is King and Thurman sort of at odds in terms of how do they interpret how to react to the time that we live in?
I think they're both kind of talking about that like irresistible pull that's inside, that is within us, maybe that comes from the Spirit of God, where we have to act or speak up or do what is not in accordance with the way the world would have us to be, even though it cost us something.
Yes. And I like that. I like your last name too. Sister Johnson is saying where I'm really trying to go, right? That in Thurman, you're going to see sort of this dialogical movement, right? This inward outward pull, right? So in a sense, they're in agreement, because Thurman is always, right, dealing with sort of this inwardness, right? That there's an inward drive, and he's calling it here the Spirit of God, right? And he wants us to really tap into the inward part of our faith, right? King is responding, as he says, to the zeitgeist, which is the outward, right? And moving forward, how then does Thurman navigate this concept of an inward outward faith? And I don't want to be too, well, I can't talk about Thurman, I'm sorry, I can't talk about him any other way. So if it sounds a little bit abstract, it's because in some cases it is, right? It is abstract, right? When we talk about the inwardness, but he does give us some practical ways of tapping into that. So let me move forward then. Now that we've set that stage, let's look then at his use of dualities, as I call it. Now, I don't want to throw you with the language. So what is Thurman's theological legacy given us, right? This use of an inward, outward relationships. More specifically, a dialectical approach to interpret the biblical text, right? So with the dialectical, there's always this tension in the text Thurman sees, right? You can't understand for him the text without looking at the context, right? And the two are in tension. The two are pulling and pushing each other. I don't know if you all saw this, but Will Smith actually spoke out. Did y'all see that? He spoke out, he did an interview, and it really was enlightening. He described himself in the moment as the child, the young boy who saw his mother being abused by her husband, and he couldn't do anything as a child. Right? He was in that moment, that moment. And for him, what happens then is in the moment on live TV, that comes back. And so now he has to do something. And the problem that many of us had is, well, why'd you have to do something then like that, right? is because of that tension, that pull, that I couldn't do it then. And I can't let another moment go by like that where I don't do it. You don't have to agree with them, but we're trying to tap into the human nature, right? And how we're pulled and how we have these tensions. And so the man on stage was the dad at that moment, right? The abusive, and he had to step up. Enlightening in the same way, and I do digress, but for a reason, to drive home that within each one of us, we have these tensions, and Thurman is trying to get us to tap in and to understand the inner pull. Is that making sense before I move too much further? I like to check in and do these. These are very surgical.
Well, Reverend Rob Stevens here. I think it
Yes,
makes
how you
sense.
doing, Brother Stevenson?
Good. I think it makes sense. And as I listen to you expound on Dr. Thurman and Dr. King, I think that as Dr. Thurman was talking and teaching about the inward pull, I see Dr. King as executing what was on the inside of him outwardly. So he was influenced by Dr. Thurman, but he was also taking what he was influenced by and he acted on it. He executed it. He implemented it. In other words, he took what he learned and what he believed, started to believe, and started to manifest it and demonstrate it and show us what it looks like.
That's so true. That is so true, right? That he executes. And in many ways, we're going to see even more, right? But you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head on that. King becomes a manifestation in many ways of sort of that tension in motion, right? For many of us, the reason why I keep slowing down on this, because it's new for some of our ears, or it's uncomfortable for us to think inward and outward as a kind of tension that exists in us, right? We want to think of ourselves as sort of this non-contradictory, essence, right? That we don't have contradictions, right? We don't have these tensions in us, right? That we're always consistent in some things. But the reality that Thurman is pushing us to look at is that in the tension, in the inward and outward, that is where we find sort of this third space, which is the true essence of who we are. I'm gonna say that again. I don't know if y'all got that right. That in the tension, right? In the yin and the yang, and that's why he could flow from Christianity to other religions, right? In that yin and yang, in that dialectical Hegelian tensions, right? The theses and the antithesis, you do find a synthesis, right? And you have to have the theses and the antithesis in order for you to come to some type of synthesis of identity. And so it does sound in a bit for many of us, and particularly as he flows into even embracing other faiths, or it flows into saying that Jesus really didn't want to be worshiped. He wanted to be emulated. Right? He wanted us to emulate him. Greater works have no man, but you shall do greater, right?
That's right.
He wanted us to do what he did. So Thurman, it really pushes us to think about tension, the dialectical approach to the Bible. Here we see it, how he navigates in his Christology and the way he thinks about Jesus, right? He thinks about Jesus as the historical man, right? The man Jesus, versus the ahistorical Christ. I remember Dr. Grant was teasing out, Dr. Jacqueline Grant was teasing out this ideal of white woman's Christ, black woman's Jesus when I was a student of hers, right? And she was still in the process, right? I had her when she was working on a doctorate degree. So she was still teasing out this ideal. But what does it mean in the womanist framework to think about Jesus versus the Christ, right? Look at, let me see, does anyone have a Bible? Since we are in Bible study, I don't know if anybody had one. Anyone have a Bible? If you turn to Hebrews in the first chapter, you're going to see some of the highest Christology, as we call it in the Bible, right? The way of thinking about Christ, right? God who in some times in diverse places spoke to us through the prophet has in these last days spoken to us through his son, whom he made the heir of all things, by whom he made the world, right? Jesus, this Christ, he who is the express image of God's person, right? Christ is to God the essence of God, right? You can't know God, the writer of Hebrews says, unless you know this Christ, right? You can't get to God. You can't conceptualize God. He's the embodiment of God. He's the icon, the Greek word says there, right? You have to click on the icon to get to the program. If you don't know how to get through Unix and DOS, you need an icon, right? You come into work and all your icons are gone. Some of us would be lost. We wouldn't know what to do with a computer, right? So Jesus is the icon to God, right? High Christology. But Thurman's approach is not the high Christology approach. He's the historical Jesus, the man, the baby born in Bethlehem approach, right? This Jew, as he says, and he's not just a Jew, because the Jews, he calls them these miraculous people, right? That they even exist, that they even survived, right? He's a Jew, but he's not just a Jew. He's not a Jew like Paul, trained Pharisee. He's not that kind of, he's a poor Jew. And Jesus is a poor Jew, part of a minority group of people living under oppression, right? That's the Jesus that he taps into. So do you see the dialectical tension as I've described, even in the biblical text, as we talk about Christ and where Thurman wants to tap into this notion of Jesus and the Christ? Questions about that, thoughts, comments before I move forward?
Reverend Ken, there was a question in the chat earlier. Do you want?
I'm sorry. I appreciate you helping me. I don't look at the chat. I'm sorry. But thanks. What is the question? Let's see.
Didn't Dr. Thurman also say that we needed to make peace with the diabolical that is within us? Is that some of the pull and tension?
Yeah, isn't that something? That's kind of where I was going with the whole Will Smith thing. But isn't that something that all of us, we're good and we do some things that are not, right? That's the reality that in part, right? The evil, if you will, is built into the creation, right? Evil is a tree when we encounter it for the first time, the tree of knowledge, right? It's a part of the creation. It's built in, right? It could be managed, right? It's growing, it's there, but it's a part of the nature, right? It's a part of nature. And so how do we, in the Christian faith, to be honest, we have to wrestle with the idea of the existence of evil in many ways. When we look at, the beaten, crucified Christ before he dies, he's on the cross, right? He's bloodied, he's beaten. He's got the crown of thorns, he's bleeding from everywhere. And this is the salvation of the world, right? That's how God's working it out. Right. So what is God, Thurman says, what is God really doing in the evil, right? That's in us all, right? What is he doing? He's working out salvation. Whew, boy. Just think about that, right? So at first he doesn't want us to know, but he's like, well, okay, I'll put it there and let's see if we can manage it, right? Because everything is good, right? Are y'all with me? I'm back in Genesis now. So everything is good and very good, right? There's no, that's all we know, right? As human beings, that's all we know. Everything's good, you made it, everything's good, right? But in the nature, I put something there for you to manage, but I myself am the owner of it. And so what happens is that you have the knowledge of good. I own the other knowledge. But in part, once you partake of that other knowledge, that's what makes you human. Hopefully that gave you some framework of the way Thurman is thinking about, that. Was there another question? Or did I answer your question, or did it give you something to think about?
There wasn't another question. There isn't another question. Not.
Yes, no? Okay. So let me move forward with our next slide here.
You need to share your screen again, Reverend Ken. There you go. Okay.
All right, so there's, as Thurman describes, an inner sanctuary and outer sanctuary. An inner sanctuary, many of us, we come to church to the outer sanctuary. And sanctuaries, by definition, have these multiple dimensions. The outer courts, even in the church, you do know that all secure and, financial institutions are constructed around, architecturally designed around the sanctuary motif, right? You do know that, right? You go to the bank, it's a sanctuary, right? You have the outer court, right, where everybody can come, right? But then you got those people behind the window, they call them the tellers, right? And then you got the back room, right? Everybody can't go back there. And then you have sort of those locked up vaults, right? So it's architecturally designed, around this whole theme of access. And for Thurman, what he wants us to do, to take a journey, as he describes it, an inward journey through the layers of ourself, to get to that place inside of ourselves to where there's an inner sanctuary, the holies of holies in you. Now that, for us has to also include a kind of self-lifting, right? A new self-revelation, a new way of seeing the self, right? A new way of understanding the self, which doesn't just come through praise. Now I'm about to come down the lane here. So it doesn't just come through praise. It doesn't just come through prayer, but it comes through meditation for Thurman, which leads to silence. So the earth is the Lord, and the earth belongs to God, right? And when God is in the place, right? Let all be silent before the Lord. Like when Isaiah says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. He was high and lifted up. I'm getting close. And then I looked at him, his train filled the temple. And I said, when I finally saw him, I said, woe is me. And I'm a man who is a wretch undone. And you know what? I am at the place to where I can't even speak anymore. So when we really encounter God in the inward sanctuary, there are no words, because God is beyond our words. That if we can describe it, if we can name it, as God told Adam and Eve, that whatever you say, that's what they would be called. But those are things that you're the God over, but you can't name God. I have to tell you. If I was at church, y'all, I would expect some amens on that one. I would expect some shouts on that one, that there's an inward place that when we get through our prayer and our devotion, we come to a place of silence before the Lord. And so this is one of the things that Thurman instituted as he pastors, as he writes in his theology, the place of silence in our devotion. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but let me finish these points. Contemplative, the tension between a contemplative religion, right? A contemplative faith, a faith that finds God through contemplation, through imaging inside of us, imaging God in us, versus a social justice driven religion, and the tension between those, that as I've imagined God, as I've found God through the contemplative space, then how does that then drive me to social justice? And can those two coexist? And then the other important dualities that he finds that really defines his faith is the hidden meanings found in the spirituals of enslaved people, of formerly enslaved people, is a part of his dualities, right? So by that shall we all gather down to the river, we know is a duality message in the song, right? But duality for Thurman, these two messages happening at the same time, right? So we all gather down to the river, in one sense, we're talking about being baptized, right? But in another sense, we're talking about we're going to all gather down to the river, right? We're literally about to leave here. We're going to meet down at the river, right? So how the songs become these dual messages, right? Which so much define, our language, our culture in the Black church. So I've said a lot there. Just in his, in the way he sort of develops meanings to create his mystic theology, the contemplative one I mentioned as well. He's not a monk, right? But at the same time, he finds this place to where, there's a need for him. For his adherence to the faith that he's teaching, to find God in that space. That's the real space for him. Right? Take some questions. Any questions, comments at this point?
So Reverend, I'm going to just jump off this platform one more time. I listened to what you were sharing about the duality, about the inward person, about knowing God. I believe, for me, I'm thinking that until I come to a place to where I can be fully transparent before God, and I can talk to God about the inward and outward, mainly the inward, in a transparent, open, honest way, only then will I be able to come to the place where I can respect or handle or manage the inward things that I'm wrestling with, to have them manifest on the outside. In other words, I got to come to a place in my relationship with him to where I'm not perpetrating the fraud with you or with others. Mm-hmm. So that I could be that true, real person that can deal with the inward me and deal with the outward me that's hopefully influencing or impacting in a positive, favorable way that God has called me to or called us to. So I just think that, and I'm thinking from, a practical standpoint, the way that I can understand it. So I believe that we're in a safe space and I can be transparent here. So, as I think about it, for me, I'm just thinking like, well, how do I do that? So I can't do that if I'm not being honest with God. Because if I got to come to you and I got to act a certain way, you're never going to see the real me, and you're never going to see the me that God has called me to be, because I'm too busy trying to perpetrate. And so I think that wrestling with that inward peace and finding that meditation time, that's the real struggle for, and I'm just speaking for Rob Stevens, that's the real struggle right there. So I'll stop.
You on it, Brother Stevens, though. I mean, you definitely sounding like a Thurman disciple in terms of the wrestling, because that's what he tells us to do, is to wrestle with it. It's an ongoing dedication to working on, that inward journey. It's a journey, and I just scratched the surface by saying it's a journey, but you're right on track. I appreciate that.
I also think what I appreciated in that is that it's not just a inner journey that's just about me. It's an inward journey that's connected to our interconnectedness and the common good. And you really talked about it in terms of social justice. And, even for us as a church, when we talk about individual growth and social transformation, it really is that sense of, that inner journey that we're on is very much connected to the ways in which we can help change the world, or be catalysts, or understand that we stand with those who we are connected, and we have to care about those who are, who aren't being treated well, and, who are going through difficult times and are being oppressed by structures. And so that's also, I think, what I'm also hearing in this.
Yeah, that's, and it's, you mentioned that, our church motto, how, that's very thoughtful, that we are recognizing those dualities, right, and pulling them together in the way we describe our own identity as a church. It's by no means an easy thing, right, to be both, right? But to be conscious of both, I think is really what we're getting at, right? That, that part of the faith is to be inward, right? There's a well-known documented story about right after Dr. King, the first assassination attack, or the attack on him with the woman who stabbed him with the letter opener. Dr. Thurman went to visit Dr. King, and he challenged him to rethink, the movement and the way he was doing it, and to take time off to really process the inward journey. And, we know the famous sermon that came out of that, "If I Had Sneezed," right? And where do we go from here? Because that was one of the phrases that Dr. Thurman mentioned to him, like, where do you go from here? Later it comes out as one of Dr. King's books. And so even the greatest of us, right, is called to rethink where we are and to process. We're so complex. We're so, Sister Jonice had done a study, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, right? We're so fearfully and wonderfully necessary for us to take the time, to see who we are. Let me see, what time do we have, Sister Catherine?
We're at 7 o'clock, so you have about 15 to 20 more minutes.
Okay, good. All right. So there's just a couple of practical things that I wanted to touch on. I think we did a good job in terms of kind of going through his tenets, and so I won't go through all of those slides. But I did want to come down to some of these practical ways of thinking about Thurman. So let me share this slide. And you don't have to be a theologian or whatever. I just want to get your input on some of these questions, okay? So we talked about this whole notion of Thurman being a Christian mystic. I don't know if it fits him or not. What does it mean? But I want to get your take on that. Brother Stevenson mentioned, like, how do we do these things, right? I want to talk about meditation. So that's number 2, and then silence, and then what does it mean to take the inward journey? So let's do the first one then. Anyone want to respond to this idea of what it means to be a mystic? Like, what is that? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Is it outdated? What are your thoughts?
So I'll comment on that. I'm in East Atlanta Village, though, so if it's loud, I apologize. I studied with mystics and shamans and people from all over the world, and it was interesting because I grew up in the church. That was my first love, and there's this whole thing about not asking questions, like don't look over here, don't ask that question, don't look behind that stone. And then once you start studying other traditions, you hear things like the Buddha who says you can only know truth by your own experience. And you're like, wait, what? I never heard that before. And you hear things like Carl Jung, humanistic psychology, who says, I'd rather be whole than good. And we realize, like, we're constantly in this battle trying to dissect ourselves, like, am I in punishments or am I in rewards? Like, we can't be in the flow of, like, the spirit because we're always judging ourselves, and there's no condemnation in Christ. So if we believe that, then we have to recognize that, you know, yeah, we have flesh, but we're whole. It's not duality, it's somewhat non-duality at that point, because you can't have one without the other. And that's maybe what this whole human experience is about, that understanding and seeing that. So like, it has to tie into social justice, because you can't have the inner journey without the outer. But I would say that the inner journey is probably more difficult of the two at times, even though we're like facing all sorts of different things in the world, because you can be out there and like fighting and fighting. But when you have to get really still and wrestle all the stuff that's deep down, that's hard.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I love the way you connected the concept of mystic to the universality of faith, right? And accessing God. And it may not always look the same as the Christian way of accessing God. And that's hard for us, right? I grew up Pentecostal. I mean, it's like you don't get to God unless you go through Jesus, right? There's no way, you know, you got to go through Jesus, right? And so, but this ideal, yeah, I think it transcends that, right? That you know, in a way, it releases God to from our confines, and recognizing that, yeah, God is bigger than us. I mean, it's almost like us believing that we're the only life form in the entire universe, right? Like God created the whole universe just to have these little specks you can't even get to the other parts of the universe, you know. We just did it for all for just you guys. Arrogant in a sense, right? That we can own God that way, you know. So yeah, no, definitely a way of tying the mystic path. And I know it's hard for some of us. It's not, you know, to disrespect that, but yeah, this was Thurman's journey, right? So I appreciate that, Sister Johnson. Anyone else want to address that?
Reverend Ken, did Thurman describe himself as a Christian mystic, or did biographers and those who wrote commentary on him describe him as a mystic?
Both. Yeah, that's a very good question, both. So, well, put it this way. There's sermons that he preached where he sort of describes himself. Like he says, I have been described as. You know, people say, and then he says what mystics are, which kind of apply to him, right? But I don't think he was the type to want to be named in that way. Like that's kind of antithetical to Howard Thurman, like to take a title or a name and, you know, this defines me, you know. So I don't think he had, from my read of him, I'm going to listen to a bunch of his sermons. I had some, but it's probably with the audio, it might not be good. I listened to a bunch of his sermons where he used the term. But for him, it's too limiting. And his whole faith was about taking the limits off, even of our own self-descriptions, taking the limits off of our own identity. He was about a kind of a universality, right, of being able to tap into, you know, those aspects of ourselves that are there that we haven't even discovered. And so I don't think the term mystic for him would have been sufficient to like, okay, yeah, that's it. Because then that goes against everything that he's teaching, right? That you have the title for me now. So very good question, but it's a real nuanced way I tried to answer it if you see the way I've described it. I saw a question that came up. What was that? Thurman, can I see the presentation to research Thurman? I'm not sure what that means. Do you want my presentation or who's asking that question? Pamela? Help me understand what you're asking. Oh, okay. I'm just reading the part. Catherine, you see, I don't do the chat. I'm sorry.
Ken, could you talk more about the church in San Francisco? You know, because I think that it came at a particular moment in time, you know, if you will. To what degree was it even pre the zeitgeist of his time, you know, there? So I went to the other greatest seminary in the world in Berkeley, California, Pacific School of Religion, and was in the Haight-Ashbury and in that whole area in the 80s. But you know, the stories and what you hear about kind of these churches and the movements, and so I'm interested to just if you could talk more even about the church and its context and zeitgeist.
I mean, that was great, what you said, Reverend Vaughn. My takeaways, one, you had some great leaders come out of that church, you know, some great theologians. But in terms of the context, it was his opportunity to do exactly what he had been preaching and writing about. It was a big experiment for him. Thurman, he started this when he was at Howard, right, of bringing students from various cultures and backgrounds together and kind of putting them together and seeing what that synergy is. The sort of this, again, the dialectic, right? You put the opposites together and see what happens. And so the church was that for him. San Francisco was the perfect place for that because it was so diverse, even, you know, back in the 40s. You had a booming, growing Asian population, so you did have a lot of Asian people attend the church, of African Americans, so racially diverse, without going through all the races of people, which is a social construct anyway. And then you had him given this opportunity. He started doing new things with worship, right? So, and San Francisco is perfect for this, right? Because you got different cultures. And so he started introducing like theater during the worship service, right? And it was well received. It was groundbreaking. It was fantastic to see sort of this demonstrative way of displaying the gospel, but it was also an interfaith church. And so he allowed, you know, the worship and the experiences of other faiths to participate, using their own, you know, praxis in that church, right? So you had interfaith, you had theater, you had contemporary music, and it became a place where the self, the individuals, the self could fully express, right? And you didn't, who was that saying, didn't want to hold back, I have to be authentic, right? So you could be your authentic self. And I think, that's the scary part, Reverend Vaughn, for many of us in traditional churches, is like how real can we get, right? Versus how church, the church has a sort of choreography to it, right? So how real that tension, right? And Thurman was able to, it had been building up because he did it at Howard, he did it at Rochester, and then, in San Francisco, it was just a full-blown, I'm sorry, he did it at Boston. It was just a full-blown experiment of free worship. If that anyway touches on what you're getting at from my read of it. A very good question. All right, we got a couple of minutes.
So can I, will you say a little bit about, you said a little bit about how Thurman's grandmother influenced him. And also, and I don't know if you have information about this, about how his friendship with Mary McLeod Bethune, although she was much older, and I think he, in fact, might have done her eulogy or something, but just how women were influential in his journey.
Yeah, you know what? I started reading a dissertation. There's a dissertation out by a young lady who wrote about his grandmother's sister Ambrose, Nancy Ambrose. And that's what kind of made me include that. That's a subject in and of itself, but here's my abstract, right? Is that the grandmother is his footing, right? For all of this, right? And she's a former slave. And so she introduces him to the spirituals and the slave religion, right? The religion of the slaves, in terms of how church then becomes this transformative space, right? So that, I'm a slave by day, but at night at church, that salvation is really possible. And the grandmother kind of gives him a theology of transformation, right? That the faith, the Christian faith, is and should be transformative to the self. So that's where I am with this. My professor, again, Dr. Earl, is written on this extensive, right? Riggins Earl, right? This whole, salvific experience of the slave, right? And how that looks, that I looked at my hands looked new, looked at my feet did too. So this sort of metaphoric way of saying that I'm a slave, but I'm a child of God, right? And having that duality intention is what the grandmother does for him. Bethune, yeah, he's from Florida. He's from Daytona. She's from Daytona. You have that connection. I haven't, to be honest with you, done a lot of reading about their relationship, but I do know they crossed paths. And there was a synergy with, all of his contemporaries around that time. That some of them I did mention. And she was one, who was a significant leader in his community as well as nationally. But that's a whole nother study, right? The women who really were the formative voices at the core of Thurman's theology, right? And this whole notion of transformation, right? So the inward journey ultimately ends as a transformative process, right? Like when you come before God, anyone who went before the God of the Old Testament, when they saw God, what happened? They transformed. Moses went up to the mountain and he actually saw God, and he came down and he was covered with the glory, right? There was a transformation, right? You look into the glass darkly, but then you see face to face. And then when you see face to face, you will be changed into the image. Right? So there's a transformation. So in the inward journey that, his grandmother's given him, this sort of get to that place. Don't just get to the church building. or to the church under the tree, but get to the place to where you actually meet God. And when you meet God, we'll know it. Come on, Holy Ghost. I feel like shouting on that one, right? When you get to God, we, the community, will know that you've been with God. So I'm going to leave it there. I wish, I'll leave it there. But that's an excellent question to leave it on. And yes, Catherine, sounds like that's your call on that one. If you want to pick up that research and run with it, looking at the influential women in the life of Howard Thurman and just bringing them to the forefront.
Thank you. I would like to give you a preview of what we're expecting for next week. And I apologize for having a blanket on. It was kind of cold in here. So next week, we have a very, very special session. We're going to continue our discussion of Howard Thurman. We're going to do it in this way. We have as our guest presenter, reflectionist, I guess that's a word, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, who will be doing an Advent meditation on Howard Thurman. And he is no stranger to us. He has been in our pulpit many times, most recently back in October. And the other thing that we will do as a group, I don't know if you all are familiar with this book, if you can see this, The Mood of Christmas by Howard Thurman. There are some wonderful short reflections in here. And what we'll be doing next week is reading some of those as a group and discussing. And so and you'll find that they're very accessible. They are better read aloud and read in community because they are dense. But there's some really good practical, I think, going back to what Reverend Ken said, there's some very good practical nuggets that Howard Thurman gives us that we can find in this book and many other books. And we'll also give you some books that if you're unfamiliar with Howard Thurman or you want to dig deeper into his writings, we'll give you that information as well. So that'll be for next week. So we hope that you will join us then. Reverend Vaughn, did I leave anything out?
You did not. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Ken, for your sharing tonight.
Absolutely.
Very provocative and thoughtful.
Mm-hmm. And I saw a question in the chat. One thing that you'll need to know, I don't know who's listening on Facebook, next week, after the theological reflection, we will get off of Facebook Live because we will be wanting to go into smaller discussion groups and breakout rooms. So once we do that, we will not be on Facebook Live. So please plan to join us on the Zoom as opposed to Facebook Live if you are able.